Hello, everyone. Emmerron here. This is my first time really back in making something that is actually informative for some time. This series, How to GM Cyberpunk Red, was something that I started initially as a weekly project because I felt I had a lot to say about the topic at hand. I had a lot to share conceptually. And in more recent days, obviously, that has kind of been not undermined, but definitely supplemented and supplanted by the podcast, which I run with Diamond Dust, that I'm very, very happy to be part of. Very proud to produce that with her every single week. For the most part, medical issues that I've had in the last couple months notwithstanding, or last minute schedule change stuff. It all can happen. Life is real still, even for those of us who you may just indulge on the other side of a screen and listen to our words and take them as you do. But bottom line here is that that has large implications, obviously, on how often I have something novel and wholly unique that I want to discuss related to running the game, or, whether it's something concerning DLC within the game or what have you. Anything I want to talk about relating to Cyberpunk Red most of the time comes through the podcast. And so this is me coming back and adding another entry to the How to GM series, because I feel as though while some of these things that I'll talk about in this video are concepts that I've either touched on another video within this series, How to GM, or that we've talked about in our own way over on Wireheads, I still feel like there's a lot to talk about here. And I feel like there is definitely some novelty to the things that I have to say about it. So I'm back, at least for a little bit, to talk. I have no guarantee that this is going to start back up into something weekly. I'm certainly more busy now probably than when I initially did this. Back then I was still learning what it meant to be a freelancer, which is really what I am at the end of the day. And now I am much more established. I run 3 games currently every single week of Cyberpunk Red that are just on Start Playing, and then I'm also a participant in several other games, as you might imagine, as they kind of happen, not as regularly, but between wanting to do other games, spin up other games, play when I can, it gets very busy. So I will try to be better about content here on YouTube. I've been saying it for quite a while now over on Wireheads that the thing I do with Diamond there, the podcast itself is by and large kind of the time I can afford myself every week to really go in and make something. So this is going to be what I can do now, and I will try to do more in the future and be better. I cannot guarantee that this is going to hold up super, super long term. But all the preamble out of the way, let's talk about today's topic. So first and foremost, for those of you who are new to the channel, who maybe saw my crazed wizard alter ego yesterday as I'm recording this on April Fool's Day 2025, welcome. I don't hate D&D. I came from D&D. I love 4th edition D&D, and I lost love with 5th. So that gives you a little bit of context about who I am and my background here. I love Cyberpunk Red. In case behind my head, I could just really quick zip back. We got 3 different Cyberpunk posters, and then, hold up. There we go. That is a map of Night City. And I've got several other Cyberpunk posters kind of drifting around just out of frame of the camera here. And that lovely sign behind me, the node sign, that was a prop that my wife and I made for a campaign that I was running before I ever decided to do this full-time streaming. So just to give you an idea of why I talk about this, it's because one, I'm unabashedly happy to admit and discuss that I have autism. I am hyperfixated on things at any given time, and TTRPGs have been a long time passion of mine, whether they were like my immediate hyperfixation or just something that I love. That is just dependent on where I was in life. Currently, right now, I found a way to use the power of autism to be a superpower, as Kyle Hill would describe it, to do something productive with that love and that passion and that focus that I afford to it. So this is who I am. I have been a game master for the last, now I've got to think about my age, but it's been about the last 15 years or very near to it, on and off, between Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, much later starting up Cyberpunk Red with a group of my real life friends, one of whom was running it. I did not start running it. I started as a player. And then about 6 months after that started, I started running my own groups, namely the group that this node sign would eventually be kind of the banner of. And then from there, I've taken on running all kinds of other stuff. Once my eyes were opened to the beauty of TTRPGs outside Dungeons and Dragons, my horizons were significantly expanded. My desire to learn about all of what is out there now is very peaked, and I just really want to keep learning more as much as I can until eventually one day I will just probably run out of the time and energy to properly study, read, and comprehend what I'm doing. I'm getting close probably nowadays, but I'm not there yet. So while I've still got the energy, I'm going to talk about whatever kind of piques my interest there. But Cyberpunk is kind of home for me. No matter where I go, what I learn, I have loved this game throughout all of that, and I always find myself coming back even in times where like my passion for it maybe wanes a little bit just because I've been playing a lot of it. Obviously every week, if I'm running 3 games, that's a lot of time that I spend entirely within the Night City mind space. I'm an admin now over on the Artel server, which was not the case when the series started. So between being an admin over there, albeit one that is a little bit less active than some of the others are, I still try to stay abreast of what's going on there. I'm, obviously content creator when I can find the time to. I'm a professional GM now. So time is a thing that is getting in shorter and shorter supply. So let's talk about, now that you know who I am and what I have done, what I am doing, let's talk about Cyberpunk Red and today's topic. So today, I want to talk about something that is, again, a more general RPG concept. Obviously, I'm going to talk about this through the lens of Red because obviously the way this is going to shape up is going to look a little different depending on what game you are applying it to, because it does involve some combat mechanic balances and stuff like that. But I do think that there are some pretty general principles that you can take from what I'll discuss here and apply it even if you are playing a different game. I know I've used the same sort of framework for running games like Fabula Ultima, for running when I've run the Borg game, Cyborg and Morkborg. I've also utilized this when I go back to things like Dragonbane, which is probably the nearest Dungeons and Dragons analog that I do keep up with to a fair amount. So with that all said, the topic today is when and how to play fair as a GM. So you're going to hear that probably, those of you who especially are coming from games where maybe the role of being a game master is one that stands up as being fairly contentious. And by that, I mean, you feel like you and the other players are playing a game against the dungeon master or the game master. And that leads to a sense that you have to win, right? And that the dungeon master or game master, by extension, has to lose. And I think that there is a point where if that is your table dynamic, obviously some games half promote that dynamic. And there's not a lot I can do about fixing that other than to suggest that if you find friction within that dynamic at your table and it is not good for you, find another system, because I promise you, as familiar as you are with the one you're running, there is a better one that does not introduce that dynamic, at least not maybe to the extent that you are experiencing it at your table. And I think Red in particular, which is why I want to talk about it in the context of it, does a very good job of making the GM feel as though they are part of the crew at times and against the crew at others. So you straddle the line between a foe and a friend pretty readily. And sometimes you go the middle route there and become a passerby, and you aren't a friend or a foe. You are just someone else, right? Who is there to exposit or to, give some random world building information to the players. But you are very much not in opposition, because Red does not have a real concrete, like, you have to win by being the best at whatever, or you have to win because you have to, beat the final boss of the dungeon and then come out the other side. Or, you need to reach the highest level of a tower or something like that. Like a lot of dungeon delve RPGs, and this, it might sound like I'm speaking a little more pointedly at Dungeons and Dragons. That may be because this is mostly the other framework that I have to examine this from, but it does apply even in cases like Morkborg or Cyborg, where the adversaries are very much like just adversaries. They are not people in the complete sense most of the time. They tend to feel more like bags of HP that you throw at the players with some tricks up their sleeves that can harm them, and the interplay between the players and those things are typically resolved through combat of some kind, and it leaves you feeling a little more, in my experience at least, it ends up making me feel more like their enemy or their foe, their opponent, than their cheerleader, which is kind of the way that I try to run my tables. I want to root for the players. I want to see them succeed. I don't want to see them fail. I wouldn't design an encounter that I didn't think they could get out of unless they earned the encounter that they cannot get out of. And that encounter is part of what we're going to talk about today. So, what is playing fair on its face as a game master, at least within Cyberpunk Red? So the way that I would define this is, if you are running a table, you are typically encouraged for combat encounters to balance them by the numbers. We've kind of talked about this before at earlier entries in the series. If I remember to be smart and go through and properly edit this on the YouTube side of things, I'll put a little card up in the corner here where you can go back and watch that if you're interested. I know I've talked about it in the context of hardened enemies, because we have several DLCs where those are present. They also expanded rules for them in Danger Gal Dossier, but the general system for enemies in this game bases the fairness of an encounter largely upon how many players are there against how many enemies there are. And this is, in my opinion, actually probably one of the best ways to do this from a game design standpoint, just because then you aren't as concerned about what level are the enemies, what level are your players. I know some of you are going to be hearing echoes of my April Fools where I was talking about crushing people with the Tarrasque and out-leveling them, and the reasons why those are the things I leaned into are because those are the very principles by which things get out of hand in a way that the players cannot solve, and they're done sometimes by more vindictive or malicious GMs that view their position at the table to defeat the party. And like, that is their whole purpose in running a game, is to seek that power that they would have in terms of like attacking the players, ensuring their failure. That is not what a good GM should do. Even in those games where you are more oppositionally set up against the party, I would argue you should never be in the position where you are solely their enemy or their opponent. that isn't really your role. It may sound at first when you're new to the concept like that is what it is, but it isn't. I promise you. The more you think about yourself as the motivator of the story, more the omniscient narrator, and less the opposition, you will have a much better time. I will 99% of the time think that that would hold up true in most RPGs. Again, unless you are like a human computer, because the rules say you have to be for whatever system you're doing, this is a case where your ability to intervene for the players should come in as often as your ability to intervene against them. And you should be taking advantage of both sides of that coin depending on the context. So playing fair is learning how to do exactly that. It is learning when to maybe pull your punches to an extent, learning when to force your punches, and learning how that balance is struck. So typically, what I would consider pulling my punches is, if we're talking just raw by the numbers, we're not talking any situational context for this, we're just talking like when you set up a combat encounter in Cyberpunk Red, what does it look like when it is quote unquote fair? What does it look like when it's quote unquote unfair or levied against the players somehow? So you are pulling your punches if in a typical encounter you are throwing less than the required number of enemies at your opponent. And so what that means is you are throwing onto the board less than one mook per party member, or the mathematical equivalent thereof. Because a quick recap for everyone, in Cyberpunk Red, mooks, you place them 1-to-1 against players. Lieutenants are 2 against 1 to the players. The mini bosses are 3 against 1 to the players. And finally, bosses are 5 against 1 to the players, with their hardened variants accounting for about a half gap between each of those sub layers, essentially. So with that in mind, you can start to see why it gets really important to build an encounter that properly balances those numbers, because when it says these are meant for 2-to-1 coverage by the party, essentially, it means that you need 2 party members to deal with one of those enemies because they are that skilled or well-equipped or whatever, and dealing with them is going to hurt if you're one-on-one with them. And mini bosses and bosses just get worse, to the point that if you're up against a boss level encounter and you're solo, unless you are really, really, really good and you are like actually a solo the role and you've got the right skills, the right weapons, the environment is semi-favorable to the things you want to do with your build, like unless all of that lines up, bosses 1v1 will probably kill you. They will probably end your character's career and you will not be able to deal with that. They're even in the context that you have a solo that is properly spec'd. If anything goes wrong, you roll the wrong roll at the wrong time. I mean, it can just be one thing and it's over, right? So with that in mind, pulling your punches means you do less enemies than the party is in number. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, well, I only have 3 enemies on the board and my player's number 5, right? I've got 3 versus 5. Well, if those 3 enemies are mini bosses, you're still outscaled on your party's side by 4 people, technically. You've got 4 extra people on them because you've got 3 mini bosses, which are 3 players each in equivalent. So that is going to give you an idea of, like, when we say numbers, I'm talking about an equivalent number of mooks based on the site of, or the type of enemy we are throwing, a class of enemy we're throwing at them. So what does it look like when we are intentionally going hard on the party? So typically, this is where we have to actually get a little careful, because go too far down the path here and a couple things begin to happen. And one of them isn't so much even that the party will fail. It is you will be exhausted as a GM because you will be tracking so many bodies on the board that you will be actively forgetting what each body represents and what each body has on them, unless you have something like a VTT running the knowledge base of that in the background for you and doing your math for you and all of that. And even then, this is overwhelming, I promise, if you go too far in the direction of being unfair to your party. So what does that look like? Well, I have an episode of Neon Inferno that I will try again to like link up here so that you can see it. But it is one of those sessions that went double the length of anything that I had ever intended. I always was trying to aim between 4 and 5 hours initially in Neon Inferno, and there's a reason that later on we mainly aimed at 4 and tried to stick as close as possible as we could to that. But this was an encounter where the party were going into a church, and it was a turf war between a gang known as the Inquisitors, who some of you may recognize, and 6th Street, and the parties were acting on the side of 6th Street because there was an understanding that the Inquisitors were left to do their, whatever they wanted, do their will upon the city, things would be very bad. So they go in. So me, GM, thinks, okay, I have a gang stronghold, which is effectively what they're walking into with these Inquisitors. We have a gang stronghold. This gang stronghold obviously is not going to be under-inhabited by the gang. They're going to have a lot of people there. There's going to be a lot of action in there. It's going to be not just them, not just the party, but also the 6th Street people, the other allies that people have called in. It gets busy, gets messy, it gets insanely difficult because you, the GM, are going to be rolling dice for all NPCs, whether they're friendly or foe. You're going to be rolling dice for every little chance thing that needs to happen on the scene, like chaos tables, which admittedly at that time we did not yet have rules for or anything. So they were not a concept with which I was using that, or I wasn't even really familiar with the topic of that. So this was altogether a learning experience for me because I did not have this context before or a warning that this would go horribly bad. But I threw the party into a scene where there were, I believe, somewhere between 10 and 15 of the enemy force, another 5 or 6 of their friendly force, and them. So let me explain to you what happened when they did that. So we enter the scene. The party crashes through the roof. They try to approach this stealthily as possible. They fail eventually, inevitably. There's too many inside for them not to. And what ends up happening is they start getting gunned at by the obvious force inside the building. And shortly after, the 6th Street cadre that they were supposed to get in with enters the building through the lower level, while the rest of the team dropped onto the roof due to a nomad that they were working with. So they all get into this building and it turns into a firefight, but it's a firefight where, because of the number of NPCs on the scene, I, the GM, who could have taken a couple of avenues out of this, was rolling 3/4 of all dice on the table each round of combat until the later rounds. This combat took us close to 4 hours to resolve. And there are scenes that, even in our TAL adventures, will call for something like this to take place, but notably they do some things that prevent this from getting out of hand that we will talk about. So this leads to us spending the session length for this whole session. It's like 7.5 hours, I think. It is by far the longest episode of Neon Inferno. It is not something that I ever want to repeat. I made mistakes. I own those mistakes 100%, because if I had thought about it, I would have realized in the lead up that this was not the way to handle it. But I wanted to get this big plot beat out, and I wanted to do it. And this was the only way at the time that I knew how. Because, again, contextually, the only TTRPG that I had really played prior to this was Dungeons and Dragons. If you had a big encounter, you just had a big encounter. You just played it out and that was fine. So what could I have done differently? So let's start talking about managing a big encounter, because sometimes your players are going to encounter this, and it's not always against them, mind you. Like I said, you can have a friendly force in there, but it needs to then, you need to account for that friendly force. So there are two ways you can do this. And one of them is, I think, a little more elegant in terms of the time and effort it saves you as the GM. One of them is definitely a little more simulative. And by that, I mean it probably will stray results of the battle a little closer to what reality would look like for the players if they were playing it out beat by beat. And we'll talk about both of these things. And so I think I want to talk about the second one first, because this is the way that I still probably would lean away from doing it this way. But if you wanted a scene where the party was facing a large enemy force and you wanted them to have full agency in how that thing resolved without a ton of chaos rolls and things like that, you would do this. You assign each player an NPC friendly that they also get to control the actions and movement of in combat. And this gives them agency over their friendlies. This gives them roughly equal parity with the enemy forces that are on the ground. And this makes it so that no one's dragging their feet for too long at any point in the combat. You still get to define what those NPC stat blocks are going in. It's not like your party is making a bunch of new characters on their own. You are still supplying them like Mook level stat blocks for the most part here. They just get to control them like they were minions of theirs or something. And this can work. The number of dice rolls obviously doesn't change here. You're probably still going to need a lot of time to resolve all of this. But at the very least, what this avoids is anyone at the party side of the table looking at things and being like, well, I need to wait like 10 minutes at a minimum for the turn order to cycle back around to me before I can take one action, one movement, and I do it all again. And the last thing you want is to have someone have to wait for that long. Like, it should be generally that you're getting through a single round of combat once you know what you're doing. I will caveat this. If you're new and you need to check rules and stuff, that will obviously slow combat down. That is not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is if you are experienced, you know the system well, your players also are kind of similarly experienced and knowledgeable, you should be clipping through combat rounds probably one every 5 to 6 minutes, unless there's like interplay happening with like the party talking or some strategizing, which is obviously always good because it means people are taking the time to think and act and discuss it with the crew, which is never, ever, ever bad. Never, ever deny players the ability to do that unless it gets excessive. And then you can always say, hey guys, this is still a combat. You don't get the chance to really think this hard about it in character. So we're going to go back to the combat now. I've been a player and a GM at several tables where that call had to be made. So like, that is not at all a problem. You just deal with it if that other extreme starts to happen. But collaboration is obviously what we're here to do. And so with that in mind, giving players about equal agency to the enemies because they have multiple entities to control is fine. It is a fine way to do it. I've been a player at a table that managed it that way. It still took us like 8 hours to get through the context of that, but on the other side, none of us felt like we didn't get to play. We felt like we had tons of agency. We got to play some different characters than we were used to playing, which is always really good because you get to then experience the world around you more directly because you're doing it through the frame of those other characters. So that is the equally cumbersome but still more engaged way of doing this. Let's talk about the first way I mentioned. The first way is kind of what I've alluded to thus far, which are chaos tables. Now, what is a chaos table? So chaos tables and mass combat, which kind of are glued together here in the middle. This is a system that was just introduced more recently in Cyberpunk Red in Hope Reborn. If you are a game master, I cannot recommend enough that you get Hope Reborn. There are some fantastic rules in there that are good for any campaign, regardless of if you're running the one that's in the book or one that comes afterward or one that is nothing to do with the book itself. There's a couple in there that I talked about in my Hope Reborn series. Again, it'll hopefully be up there if I'm not brainless and forgetting it. But there are a couple of rules in there, like Flash of Luck, that are useful for your crew. The other for you, though, as the game master, is mass combat. Now, mass combat involves you have two forces, one that the players are aligned with that are friendly, or at the very least they're neutral with, and then an oppositional force that is against both of the other side of the table here. So even if it's a neutral force that you're maybe just in the middle of a conflict, right? The enemy force sees both you and that neutral force as enemies in the moment. And as we always like to say, the enemy of my enemy is actually my friend, at least in the moment, right? So you are essentially resolving this other mass combat, which is why it's called that, with dice rolls. And so what usually this will look like is leading into a mass combat, it's usually resolved as the climax beat of something. It's not usually a standalone on just its face. It's got its own kind of space within the narrative structure, because usually there are stakes involved here that require you going about building up this encounter, and maybe you're doing it for multiple sessions before. You could have a mass combat that is the true end to a campaign. Case in point, look at Cyberpunk Edgerunners and you'll know what I'm talking about, because mass combat happens plenty in the climaxes of that show, essentially. So you will notice if you're running mass combat that there are ways to improve your position ahead of time usually, and there are ways that it would be weaker if you don't address certain problems ahead of time. Hope Reborn builds this in a particular way to frame a specific encounter late in the campaign. That is all I will say. But mass combat very much is chaotic, right? Inherently, when you have people shooting at each other in a crowded space, whether that's an open field or a bar or whatever, bad things can happen very easily. And so typically what this looks like is initially you're going to just be rolling dice based upon the sides and how much of an advantage or a disadvantage they have relative to one another. So usually this is going to take the form of either negative or positive modifiers on the side that's rolling, depending on if they have an advantage or a disadvantage against the other team. So then we have the chaos table, which accounts for those things that could happen in the middle of things. Maybe someone shoots a electrical transformer, for example, in the back of the bar. Something explodes with a ton of sparks. And that was not something they intended to do. It's just something that happened, right? Crossfire happened, Stray hits it, bam, okay. We have an electrical explosion and possible fire starting in the back of the bar, or maybe in the back of a vehicle or something like that. And so now this changes the scene, right? It changes the context under which the combat is happening. So while the party will still have this calculation kind of going on where they're facing off against the enemies and they are dealing with a problem more immediately in front of them, and you're doing that numbers to numbers calculation that we talked about, you're going to be resolving the background around them, the forces at play in that conflict, as more abstract concepts, right? You're going to be, this one beat out the other side on this round. Okay, well, you hear the sound of a rattling machine gun in the background, and all of a sudden 3 of your friends drop dead behind you. 3 of the friendly nomad clan drop dead behind you, and now your situation is worse off than it was. Or the opposite can happen, obviously, but this is more how we're resolving it while you're dealing with the upfront necessity in front of you. And then this can translate into waves. So what this can look like then is once you've dealt with that first pocket of opposition, you would advance to the next. While the mass combat is still happening, the chaos is still happening, you go to a next engagement, right? And so now we're up against another set of 5 or 6 mooks, right? Generally, what I try to avoid with any level of encounter is never go more than 2 enemies above what the party has on the table, or else it does get that very slow, very dragging kind of feel to it, and it's very bad. So +2. +2 is the number to stay at or under, and +2 is pretty mean. +2 is pretty mean. So as we're staging all of this, this is kind of the first step in talking about being fair in a combat. And it's been a long way. I know I'm looking at my recording timer right now, and we're at like half an hour already. I promise it gets more simple from here. So you've looked at what you want to do. You've looked at your players and you know what they're capable of. You've decided hardened versus non-hardened enemies. You've decided, okay, I'm going to have, X number of mooks, Y number of lieutenants, a mini boss, whatever you've decided to keep those numbers in balance, checked against each other appropriately. You've now managed to do that, and your party is going to go into this encounter. So let's talk about the next concept. So the next one does require us looking at the game in a particular context, because as with most things in Cyberpunk, the game is not played in a vacuum. The enemies are people. They are not just bags of HP that you and your friends are going to shoot at until they are dead. You can reason with them. They will talk. They have hopes, goals, aspirations. They have things for which they will die. They have things for which they won't. And you as the GM get to parse kind of the line there. Maybe you're up against a really powerful corporation and you're up against their best and brightest, who this is their job, right? And they don't have a way other than doing the thing in front of them, fighting the good fight to the death if necessary, because that is what they want to do. That is their goal in life, is to fight to the death for their corporation. Others, though, as Diamond would probably helpfully point out at this moment, are just the gate guard. They don't care about what you're here to do. They just don't want to die. They're here to collect a paycheck, but they could also collect a paycheck flipping burgers down at the diner. They don't want to do this if it causes them to die. So you can threaten them out of the shack. You could bribe them out of the shack. They're not going to sit there and die if it does come to blows. Maybe they are a little jumpy, or they're a little bit on the aggressive side initially when you pull out your guns and they respond in kind. But the moment they take a critical injury or they're seriously wounded, they're like, oh, no, we're not doing this. Hell no, I'm going to NC Medical. Peace, guys. You guys can go on into the facility. Have fun. So your first wave can be some of these kind of more ground level people that can be reasoned with, or who have a reason to stop, right? They have a line prior to death where they will stop and run. And that is perfectly okay. That's actually better than okay. That is what a real person would do. So bear that in mind. Like, would this person want to die for their cause? If not, don't have them die for the cause. Have them try to run, live after encountering the opposition that they cannot defeat, which 90% of the time, your players, I guarantee you, will fit that bill for a mook like that. So in the context of playing fair, we now have to talk about, first of all, structuring an adventure or a gig, or however you want to label it. The bottom line is the same. If you have a party that you are going to be running through a thing, and the adventure does not have points within which the party can stop and rest, every encounter becomes cumulatively draining on their resources, on their ability to fight, their impact of things like critical injuries, all of it. All of that can come into play. And there may come a point where the party has to take their own exit ramp. There might be a point where the party decides the fixer isn't paying us enough for this. They're not paying us enough to try and do this despite us maybe dying, right? We aren't going to do this. We're out. We're done. And it's up to you as the GM to determine how likely that is to be possible. But I will say most of the time, unless you're at the end of your campaign, don't say no to the players trying that or doing that even. Like, don't get in the way of them making success toward that. Obviously, don't make it easy for them necessarily. Like, chase them, hunt them with the adversaries still on the map. Like, if you go through Reaping the Reaper, there's a point in there where, like, if they wanted to run, not only do they fail their mission horribly, but, like, they see exactly what it is they're letting live, right? And that on its face might be enough to encourage the party just, like, not to leave, right? But it also means that if they do, there are other consequences. The most immediate of which they don't get paid. The secondary of which the threat is still very real. And if that threat is still very real, they have a problem that they will now need to solve without the promise of payment, because it's gonna find them. Inevitably, it's gonna find them again. There is no avoiding it. Sure, they can take the time to, like, get away from it, lick their wounds, but they may not have another good opportunity to, like, cut the head of the Hydra off without it regrowing. And that is the problem. So that is something where, looking at it through that lens, they have the option to run. That is okay. There are other times, though, especially, like I said, at the end of a campaign, where this may not be the case. And again, I look at Cyberpunk Edgerunners for this. Imagine, if you will, how that scene would have played out if David and company could have just left, right? They could have just walked away. Not to say nothing about what that looked like to their characters, in the sense that it would have been wholly unfulfilling of who they are and totally counter to their identities. But let's say that was an actual table and those characters were manned by actual players. If that happened, what would that have looked like? It wouldn't have. They would have been hunted down. There is no world in which they wouldn't have been. So much so that several of them were when they did try to get away. And that didn't end for them well at all. They tried to run and they were caught and they were killed. I have not spoiled anything yet. I'm not telling you who did what. So the next thing that we're going to look at here is examining a situation to know which side of this line do we fall on. Whether we let the players potentially run if it's called for, or even the other side of this coin is, do we give the players too much that they would normally not be able to handle it? And that is also a perfectly acceptable thing that could happen. I point back at my own work in Neon Inferno. They've invaded military bases. There's a reason they weren't part of the shock troops going into that thing, because I knew that if they did, if that was their role in the plan, they probably would have died. Just full send, there would have been no survival. And I would have had to illustrate exactly how that looked as a giant machine gun mounted on the edge of the base, ripped through all of them, and it was over, right? That wouldn't have been fun. That wouldn't have been interesting. That would have been a futile effort for something that they maybe believed in, but it wouldn't have been climactic. It wouldn't have been, like, think about it. If it happened in an action film, would the audience be left there clapping like a standing ovation? Or would they look at it and say, well, why'd they do that? Why'd they choose to do that? That was so weird that they cut right there. Like, we don't know what happened. That is what you want to avoid. So what we do here is some clever planning ideas, right? So the first thing is, if you're going to have a multi-phase adventure that they don't get to rest in because it is a full-blown op, there's a few things to consider here. One, if the party does not have a med tech, any injuries they incur and any damage that they take is permanent. They do not get to heal that back. With, like, the very narrow exception here of being able to either invent an item if they have a tech that's done that ahead of time, that might afford them some extra space for that. And if they have a trauma response nanomatrix, which is a bit of cyberware, that if they have subdermal armor of any kind, they can patch it up with an action once per day. That is the only healing which is really allowed without a med tech. So the first thing to consider is when you're building an op for your team, because the fixer will know what their team's capabilities are, they might recommend going in with a med tech that they hire on and that you run as an NPC in the adventure. That could be a way to solve for that. Another is that they just won't offer them the part of the gig that exposes them to the highest incidence of risk of getting gunned down in a way that a med tech would be necessary to survive. That is the kind of the other way that you can approach it. So if they do have a med tech, though, there are still limits here. So obviously there are time considerations where you have to say, okay, well, they're not getting a rest. So this means they won't have at least a day between things happening. They may have some minutes, though, which is worth considering. Where do those minutes fall in the operation as a whole? And can a med tech then apply some quick fixes? So quick fixes only take a couple of minutes. They are exactly what they say on the tin. And they at least allow the party to continue on without worrying about what those critical injuries do. And in some cases, the quick fix is actually just enough to solve the critical injury. It just fixes it completely. And that's great. If it's that is the best case scenario for an op like this. But if they lose health, if the party loses health, and if they lose a lot of health especially, they get 1 speed heal in that day. They get 1. So if they get their 1 speed heal, and then the op is still going, they are fixed now at that HP total. They're not getting any more HP than that amount, whatever it ends up being at that point. They are locked in on that. And so now we have other survival tools. We have things like stims or black lace or pain editors. These are tools that let them kind of deal with the problems of penalty, right? Like they aren't going to necessarily be seriously wounded in the sense that it affects their rolls, but their HP will get lower and lower. So this is a case now where if you've got these things, these are other tools that if you know the party has access to them, you can throw a little more at them in a climax beat, knowing that they have outs, right? This is always talking about examining what outs do your players have to the hell you're putting them through. And so these are outs that they have. So now we go the next layer down. So we looked at all that. We looked at maybe what defensive capabilities they have. Do they have shields? Do they have like heavy armor? Do they have the ability to like repair their armor either through the matrix or through just equipping fresh armor jack or what? You know, what options do they have? What tools do they have at their disposal? And so from here, we then start to define, okay, if we play a fair fight, you know, maybe we want to play in 3 fights, right? We got like 2 cliffhanger fights somewhere in the middle of a facility. And at the end, we have the commander, right? And his immediate like elite guard, right? So the commander might be like a mini boss. His elite guard might take the form of some hardened mooks, for example. Or if the players are in that echelon of like, wow, this is, you know, we want to go a little higher up and your party is capable of dealing with that kind of a threat I just mentioned. You might even decide, okay, the commander is a mini boss. You know, supporters are 2 lieutenants and 2 mooks, right? We're still only dealing with 5 tokens on the board. So there's not going to be a dice deficit on the party side, assuming, again, we're assuming a 5-person party for this. So that's most often what I run for. But you do this with any number, really. And so when we hit this last encounter, this is going to determine how bad it looks for the party when they start. Not even when they finish, it's just when they start this encounter. What likelihood do they have of making it out alive? That is the math we have to work backwards from. So if we have 2 encounters, we know that generally if we're playing it fair, as in 5v5, the odds are the party will win those fights. They might do so sustaining some wounds, some injuries, depending on the kinds of weapons the enemies have access to. Things like shotguns and assault rifles obviously are going to hurt way worse than pistols usually will. Even the very heavy variety of pistol usually hurts a lot less long term than a rifle or a shotgun does, just because it can get far greater penetration from a slug or a rifle round than a pistol round can. And so obviously every chunk of HP the party takes from their hit point total, the more it matters, right? So if you know you have a party who is mostly light armor jack, which is, I would argue, probably 90% of the cases I've run into. Most of my parties are full light armor jack. Maybe they've tech upgraded it to SP12, so they've got 12 SP without a penalty. If they do, great. The bottom line is Your very heavy pistols, this is where we start talking averages. Very heavy pistols are going to do 4d6. That is 14 damage on average. So it is penetrating, even upgraded light armor jack on average most of the time, but only barely. Note that that is 2 HP that gets taken from them on the first hit if they have upgraded armor. 3 if they don't, right? That 3 HP is important, right? Because now we know, on average, each time an enemy hits with one of these pistols, it is likely a player is going to lose 3 HP at a minimum. And so when we look at it through that lens, we can start running a calculation about, okay, here's my party's total HP, right? Like this might be an exercise I do if I'm really getting exacting about an encounter, right? Here's my party's total HP. Here are the weapons against them. Here is their average armor. Here is how many rounds it will take to wear through that armor, assuming that the armor average only drops once a round, right? And if we look at it through that lens, you'll see how long it takes for your party to, on average, be seriously wounded, to, on average, be mortally wounded even, and how far they can go into this kind of gauntlet before they would drop dead. And so if you really want to be exacting and scientific about it, I usually don't go that far, but that is a way, a method by which you can design it so that your party is given the best chance that you want to allow them of succeeding at a particular phase of the adventure. So now, beyond all of that, we're going to go to a singular, hard, probably fatal encounter. And this is how you make this fun. So the first thing we have to look at when we start defining why would I put my players into a scenario that is unwinnable, potentially, right? That the odds of them making it out, any of them, is slim at best. So there's a few reasons why this might happen. So reason one, they've bit off more than they can chew from a corp that really, really doesn't like them. And they've done it in a way that's earned them a reputation. Player reputation is a big part of defining what threats are capable of going after them, what those threats are probably going to come packing. It's just a massive part of things. Because the better they are known, the more their tactics and usual gear are known as well. So if you have a party that has taken strides to avoid their reputation rising, because it's not a guarantee that their rep needs to go up every time. They can stay relatively unknown while still doing gigs and stuff. But if they make it their purpose in life to be known, most edge runners probably will think this is a good thing. They will naively look after this as the thing they should be doing. This is not always true. And the reason why is because the moment the enemy force that they piss off enough that they say, we're sending what we need to erase these guys, they are going to know what they're dealing with. They're going to know that your solo is a sniper, so they need to account for glass on the horizon. They also know that you have a nomad who is very fast, so they need to do their best to box you in with multiple units. They also might know, they have a net runner, so when we kind of go in, we need to make sure that our net security on any equipment that might be connected to a network is as good as it is, right? And so the more they know about your party, the more crew reputation is at a high level, right? Like the more people within that crew have a rep of like 6 or higher, generally speaking, that's where that breakpoint kind of starts to matter. You're going to see this be a thing where the enemies are going to know a bit more about your party with every level of reputation above that, pretty much. And so at the end of it all, if you piss off the wrong corp, they know everything about you, they're going to fight you effectively, and they very well may send enough units that you get 3 rounds of some of the hardest combat you've ever experienced as a player. And that is what you have to survive to get out the other side. It's literally objective survive. That is your ask of the party in those contexts. You've dropped, and I've done this to my players before, unabashedly, I've done this to my players before, dropped too many bosses on their head and a fixer with bodyguards in the other room that they needed to take out. And like they needed to like objective take him out and deal with the problem behind you on your way out, right? They had reinforcements. They had some chaos on the background to help them, but they still had a massive problem. They had 5 bodies on the table. I don't believe a single one of them was less than a mini boss in terms of stats and stuff. So they had a problem, a big problem. They had to deal with it. And so this was supposed to be one of the most climactic encounters of the campaign when I ran it. And it was. They talk, still, some of these players talk about this encounter to this day. And that's because they weren't left wondering what happened. They blasted the Fixer through the head. They landed a headshot that took out one of the most powerful men in Night City. That was the thing they were after. And in the course of doing this, they dealt with 2 full body conversion bodyguards that he had. Like, that's incredible. That is insane. That is such a cool story. And what came next was very much like just furtherance of that, right? But maybe your party has a reputation and a corporation wants them taken out, right? Maybe MaxTech. Maybe they know you're harboring a cyber psycho, or they have, gained an anonymous tip from the wrong corporation that, or the right one in their context, that says, hey, we've got a problem, deal with it. MaxTech comes. They don't come just 5 to an AV and like they're perfectly happy with just that, right? They're going to come kitted out. They're going to have we go back to, talking about why reputation matters. Again, there's another video that we'll try to put up in the corner here. Reputation matters because they know what you are. They know what powerful kind of equipment you have, what your capabilities are in terms of being able to dodge bullets, your ability to deal with armor piercing rounds or flame or poison or whatever, right? They know all of this, right? Or at least enough of it to be threatening to you. And so they're going to drop a group of 5 of the hardest boss level enemies against you. Objective, survive. And some of your party may die in that pursuit. Some of those characters are not going to live. That is a full send possibility. But if your party has gotten this far and they really did piss off a corporation that badly, give them a payoff, right? Don't do this to them until they believe they have an out, right? Give them the opportunity to develop an out, give them the ability to start putting a plan in motion. We're going to Delta from the city. We're going to just get out of here. We're going to hit the road. We're not going to look behind us. We're going to keep running until we are safe, if ever that day comes. And get them to the point that they're packing the last of their bags, right? They're getting ready to walk out that door, and down in their garage in the apartment building that they live in, there is a transport waiting to ferry them away to the Badlands and out of the city into the horizon. The sunset ending, as we like to call it, right? But then MaxTech punches through the windows, and AV starts running a cowboy and the grenades that follow it into the building. They smoke the room out. Anyone without their ability to see through that smoke is going to be blinded. The enemies are not blinded. They come in fully equipped for this op. They have filters. They have vision. They have guns that have been tech upgraded. They have armor-piercing ammunition to deal with their enhanced armor. They have a net runner on standby in case they run into any drones. They have everything. And against this, your party needs to win. They need to do everything in their power to try and either get out of the building or get the Hail Mary down to the parking lot and somehow get away from that AV on the outside, which will see them leaving 100%. And this is where your party will understand we either ride off into the sunset here or we will die trying, knowing that what we did was for all the right reasons. Because again, in Cyberpunk, if you pissed off a corporation, it's probably not a bad thing. It's probably, it's bad for your health, but it's not bad for your principles, your ethics, your morals, all of those. You are living your dreams 100%. You are riding off into the sunset as a punk badass who lived and died for what they believed in. And so even if you die there, there's no way that that's not fun. There's no way that that's not memorable, because you've lived that whole campaign to this point, and you're now putting the last fleeting moments of this campaign full pedal to the metal and just running on full adrenaline into the sunset. And if anyone gets away, they will not forget that. If anyone dies, the player running that character is going to say, that was a good death. Like, I've said it now for the character that I'm playing in one of my campaigns where I'm a player. If he dies in the next stop, I'm not even going to be sad, because he's done so much more than I think he ever thought would have been possible. And every extra thing he accomplishes from this point on is icing on the cake and is something to be proud of. And so this is where you end up getting death to be fun, because they're dying for what they believe in. And they're doing so in the 11th hour. It is the campaign's climax. It is the last fleeting moments of things going wrong before the players are allowed to walk off stage, exit stage right, and that is the end of the campaign, right? So live or die, it doesn't matter. Their character's retiring at the end of this anyway. The stakes on that level can be quite low, right? You can even walk into the final encounter emphasizing that to your players. This isn't another gig. This is the gig. You know, if you do this, your time in Night City is over. You will either retire a living legend, talked about in every bar in this city from now till Kingdom Come, or you will die and probably afford yourself a similarly legendary status in the mind of any who remember you. That is what you tell your players. They will buy in 100%. I have yet to see a player or a table of them that did not buy into a premise like that, right? And so that is something where ultimately it will lead up to everything they've done, right? You're going to use their life path to accomplish this. The enemy that comes for them at the end, it should be very personal. It should be something that we've established up at this point is like a massive overarching thing maybe they've been working on for multiple months in the game. And so ultimately, that is the way to set that up. Now, one of the last kind of parts of this I want to talk about. I know this has been a long video, and thank you if any of you are still watching at this point. Thank you so much for sticking with me. And this last point is not going to take us very long. So the last thing to keep in mind, and this is something that goes all the way back to session 0. Again, video in the corner. It goes all the way back to session 0. We start the game before we even start the actual campaign talking about this. What, as players, are your expectations of me as the GM and the story that we are going to tell together? What are your lines around this story? Are there things that we cannot do together here because they are upsetting or they are too much for you to handle in a emotionally stable way? You know, and that doesn't have to be a judgmental thing. That is a very like, I know there are some things that if they get brought up topic-wise at a table, I'm not going to react well to them. And I will be very upfront about those when I'm playing in a new game. And then the third thing is, what sort of characters are you playing? And what sort of game style are you expecting out of these characters? Because they might be on board for like investigation, right? They might want to be a bunch of lawmen or private investigators solving the crimes in Night City, right? Playing very neo-noir sort of stuff. You, on the other hand, may be like, okay, well, like conceptually, I'd thought about this as being more of an action film, right? Or, you know, where that punk adrenaline kind of comes into play, like I was just describing. And so this conversation is incredibly, critically important, because when you come to this last beat, how good or bad this goes is going to be entirely dependent on how much you lived up to these expectations your players gave you and trusted you with throughout the campaign. And if you are consistently meeting these expectations to the best of your ability, and even if you don't, I'm guilty of it just as much as the next guy. Even in my professional games where people are paying me to run those games, there have been times where I've fallen on my face and I just haven't lived up to what they expected of me. Or I've offered something that didn't align with their understanding of things or their desire to play in. And that's fine. Like, you're not going to hit 100. You just aren't. You're never going to be 100% on all the time. There will come a time, eventually, inevitably, where you fail. How often that happens is the mark of your success, not whether it does or doesn't. It will happen. But as long as you're, accountable to yourself and you tell the player, I'm sorry that this didn't work out, or this didn't live up to your expectations, or this didn't match what we had talked about because I got a little carried away. So that can happen too. I've been there too. As long as you do that and really own up to those things, your player will probably be on board still. You get a mulligan. I think everyone gets a second chance once, right? How many you get beyond that is really where we start to get dicey, right? I don't expect people to give me more than a second chance, typically. If I really mess up, I really don't expect more than a second chance. Like, give me one chance to fix it. If I don't, then that is probably a combination of I've done something that is, I'd hope, deeply uncharacteristic of me, because I try to stay loving of everyone, tolerant of a lot of different things. I try to stay very open-minded and very, grace-giving to the people that make mistakes on their side of things. And sometimes that can lead to my detriment, where I don't call something out as quick as I should. But I try not to be the one exhibiting at least the behavior that is, hateful or harmful or hurtful towards somebody else at the table, or towards something that they're doing, right? That is what I try to avoid. And so if I did one of those things and someone didn't give me more than a second chance, that I have to understand that. Everyone who is watching this, if you mess up on that level and people don't want to play with you because they don't trust you to respect their emotions and play nice by them, because these are games where things can get very personal, very intimate in a lot of cases, because you're dealing with the human condition. There isn't a lot that gets a lot more personal than that without literally getting into relationships with people. And being at a TTRPG table, in a weird way, if you're doing it for a long enough period of time together, you get to know the people that you're playing with. It's not like you're just strangers on the other end of a screen. Even the play groups that I have where I am running games for money, I know a lot of those people, even if I didn't know them before we started playing the game together. Because now I've been running these groups for coming very close to a year, I think, in some of the cases. And those people are some of the people that I now know best in the space, because I've just been running games for them for so long. And so knowing where they stand and knowing what you are able to do is really important, that that person, or the whole table even potentially, doesn't feel slighted or sold short by whatever it is your climax beat is. It should never be, unlike my wizard alter ego suggested yesterday, it should never ever be that you drop a Tarrasque on their heads from a mile up and expect them to thank you and comment how cool it was that you did that to them today of all days. They will not thank you. They will not appreciate it. It will not make you look cool. It will make you look like you care more about yourself, your fun, and your idea of that than you care about the players' ideas of those things. And without the players, you don't have a game. So highly encourage to always check your own biases and your own desires and try to conform them as close as you can to those of your players. And if there is ever conflict there, because that's usually where that friction starts to come in, talk about it. Don't be afraid to talk about it with your players. That is the best way to play fair to them, is to respect their feelings and understanding of the game. And if you don't do that, they will stop playing with you. They just will. Your game will not be a success. You will not get that epic ending that you were so excited and planning for. You won't get any of that. You won't get the gratification of that. And there's a point there, even if this were in my position, right? If I were the guy who had been planning something and the party all agreed, yeah, we're not doing this, we ain't feeling it anymore. I did that to myself as much as they did it, They made the choice. I'm the one who led them up to that choice, unless there were some extremely extenuating circumstances that led to us not being able to play as a group anymore. Life happened for everyone at the same time, and we all had to split separate ways in order to live, or, you know, jobs or whatever, right? Families, there's a lot that can get in the way of playing games with people. And that's okay too. But if it's a thing that could get you into a position where you hurt someone's feelings, or that you disrespect them or their time or any of that, that is why that session 0 discussion is so important, and why you following up on it as well throughout the campaign. If something gets a little like tense, or there's a bit of friction or any of that, there's a reason why you check in with your players and you write down the responses or their comments if ever they make an issue of them. Because it is the last thing you want to do is ignore that feedback. And then in the final encounter, you violate something that you were told again. And yeah, that is going to be the thing where you go up on RPG horror stories, maybe, if you do that really indelicately. So just a word to the wise. That is kind of why session 0 is such a critical part of any tabletop game. I know there's a lot of people, when I did my session 0 video, who commented things, not a lot, it wasn't the majority, but there were a few that commented on, yeah, I don't think I'll do this. I think I think my players will be fine. Like, we're made tougher stuff than that. Or, man, this sounds like something only a sissy would do. Not if you want to have fun. If you want to have fun, everyone needs to agree what fun looks like. And this is, if you're following the template laid out in session 0 for you and your players to have fun, you will not stop having fun. Basically, even in terrible circumstances. If someone dies in the middle of the session, you will be enjoying the time that you got with that character at the table. You will be enjoying the time that you know, you got to play the campaign together with the players you did, who were wielding the characters that they were. Even in the most like unfortunate circumstances where the whole party dies, even a TPK, like I had a TPK nearly happen in Neon Inferno season 1. Did that stop us from making the rest of the first season? No, because we all agreed to what fun was. And we all agreed like, hey, that was kind of crazy. Hey, the story that gets to happen now is actually going to get even more insane, because we just punched the ticket of 4 out of 5 people. That's crazy. That's insane. So now we get to see what that turns into, right? And so that is why we agree on what fun is in session 0. That's why we agree, hey, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to, you know, touch this subject matter unless I'm doing it in a fade to black manner. That's why we have GM report cards or check-ins or things like that. Hey, were there any things in the session tonight that you felt I didn't respect you, or that I could have done better to respect you, or keep mind of things that I maybe didn't do such a great job of? Like, just having those discussions will go farther than I think anyone ever initially thinks to addressing the problem before it is truly a problem. All right, so all of that said, this is what playing fair looks like. So to quickly recap, because I know I've said a lot about a lot of things in this video, and this was very comprehensive, and it tied together a lot of things that I've pointed to this corner of the screen for up to this point. That's not for another one, don't worry. You're not seeing it there, not because I forgot, but quite simply because I didn't have another one this time. But let's recap. Step 1, what you want to do, and I suppose we'll do this in chronological order, not the discussion order we had tonight. Step 1, have a productive and informative session 0 with your players. Ensure that you know what you're doing, what you can and cannot do as the GM, what topics that you are not allowed to touch without certain kinds of respect, or maybe at all, right? Know those things going in, and live up to your players' expectations of those at every turn, and be accountable to failing to do so if it happens. Because again, we're all human, we all make mistakes. That is not a black mark on you necessarily. It is simply something you need to address, discuss, and get resolved with your party ASAP if it happens, so that going forward you don't make the same mistake again. Like my mom used to tell me all the time, you can make any mistake once, just do not make it twice. And if you follow that general wisdom, this is where that comes to play. So the next thing we're going to do, look at what you want the party to do in terms of adversaries and in terms of the environment that you're sending them into. Do they have chances to rest between encounters with the enemy? Do they have chances to, patch up their equipment? Do they have an opportunity by which maybe they will get to run away? If things get too hot, does that instantly fail the mission? Doesn't it fail it? And then decide in the mix of all of that, what do the encounters that they're going to fight look like in terms of the numbers and strength of the enemy force against them? Define all of that for yourself. Once you've done that and you're starting to kit out those enemies with their gear and things like that, because you may not do that on the first step. And even if you do, this next step is going to help you refine it further. The next thing is, what is my player's reputation with the enemy faction? How well do they know my player or players, right? Maybe my whole crew. And would that cause them to equip themselves differently or behave differently, or more in particular, send specifically trained special operatives to deal with them, right? Like they may send a netrunner. If they know you have a netrunner, they may not do that if you don't, right? If you have a guy who's really good at dodging bullets, maybe they send someone, a sniper that can get away from things and move away from the party if they're seen, in order to stay hidden. Maybe the party encounters a case of, they have a secret, ace up their sleeve that they can use against the enemy force, that the enemy force isn't aware of, and so they don't know to prepare against it. Also keep that in mind. And then finally, what we're going to do at the end of all of it is determine what is the likelihood, or what is the desired likelihood I want for this encounter, for my players to get out of this largely unscathed. How damaged, beaten, and battered do I want my party to be at the end of the encounter that I'm planning, right? That will determine, are we nearing the end of a campaign? Is it big enough to judge that, or to warrant that rather? And if it is, what am I doing? What are we setting up? What's the conflict? What are the stakes? What is the sunset moment waiting on the other side if they do actually clear the objective to survive? And that is going to be entirely dependent on your campaign, your players, their life paths, the people they know, enemies or friends, and even some of the stuff we talked about earlier. The life path can modify all of this, right? What friends or enemies they have can weaken or strengthen their ability to fight. It might strengthen or weaken the intel against them. It can do all kinds of stuff for them there. So don't forget to take those into account. Don't leave those out of your calculation. They're very important for exactly that reason. And lastly here, on the end of it all, examine your tools as a GM to really ensure you've given your players not only the best chance of success, but you've given them something that they will think is a memorable fight, even if it's not a fair one. Because ultimately, there is a right way to be mean to the party, right? And it starts and ends with you understanding what tools you have to manage player stress, to manage variance working really against the players if you didn't plan for it to at that stage in things. Maybe there is an enemy force that can show up. Maybe there's like a third party, to show up to deal with the part of the problem for your players. Maybe they have favors they can call in with people. Maybe one of them is trauma team and they can call it in for that party member, right? Maybe they can negotiate with the fixer like, hey, we're trying to insert ourselves. We're 2 floors deep into this complex. They've got this thing 10 times harder guarded than you told us they would. We're asking for a raise, right? If you want us risking our life here, we need a raise, and we need you sending us a ripper now so that we can continue with this. And you might do all of those things, and that's okay. But it starts with knowing what your tools are, what your outs are to a less desirable session. Whether that means, hey, your players are getting things happening just too easy, right? They're getting by way too easy. So what do you have to throw at them out of left field here that brings things back into the middle, kind of where you want them? Or maybe your players, it's really, really hard for them and you didn't anticipate that, right? You didn't tune for that. That's not what your intention was. So what do you do to ease up the pressure, right? There's always a way to thumb the scale either side, depending on what you need out of it, right? So if you do all of this, you will play fair with your players when it counts and play unfairly with them in places where they'll remember it and they will actually have more fun than you think. So I hope all of you that listen to this and have gotten this far, that this helps. I hope that this is useful for you. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to put those down in the comments below. I am more than happy to respond there to them. Obviously, I also have the podcast with Diamond, Wireheads, where we have plenty of questions that we answer every week. So if possible, I might answer it there as well. Regardless, I would love to hear from you if you've made it this far. Please do tell me any stories that you have for memorable moments where things didn't go your way and it was still a great time. Or maybe they did go your way and the GM threw a curveball at you and it was memorable for the other side of that, right? All the same, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. As always, I'd love to thank my Patreon crew who have made all of this possible. To my backers there, thank you so much. Their names are going to be scrolling by on the screen above my head as we talk. So if you would like to join them, my link is down in the description. It is patreon.com/Emmerron. Please feel free, if you feel so inclined to support me there, go there and you can join us, get credited just like these fine people are. If you're a GM looking for advice, I also offer that at some of the tiers on there. I would love to offer you some if you are looking for it. That said, that's going to do it for this video, guys. I hope all of you have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Stay healthy, stay safe, and until next time, peace.